Good morning, everyone. Ben here, and welcome to our Senate election predictions for 2018, going state by state. Once I finish covering every single state, we're going to do weekly on Mondays. We're going to do weekly updates to the election in any state, and I'll slightly upgrade or downgrade any states based off of poll-in information, based off of generic ballots, stuff like that. So anyway, before we get into each race that we're covering today, which will be Texas, Utah, and Vermont, I'm going to look at presidential approval because that actually does matter. And we're sitting at about mid. Now notice I'm taking polls of likely and registered voters, not all polls. Now this isn't because I want to bias it towards the Republicans any, even though it might appear that I'm getting 2 points of bias. This is to eliminate statistical noise because not all adults vote, and the likely and registered voter polls are a little bit more of an accurate gauge of the voting demographics. And if I see what I mean, we're getting 3 points by switching instead of including all polls. When I only include likely and registered voters, we get a much more accurate picture. Now, of course, this was really weird, but this makes sense. And he's sitting in the mid-40s. Yeah, there are a few times when he bounced into the 44s, but he's in the low to mid 40s in percents. And if we look at all this, look at the adjusted, not the actual. If we go to the all polls, yeah, exactly. Look at the adjusted. That will give you a little bit more of a picture of where it should be, and also pay attention to the grades. So don't ignore the poorly graded ones, just be a little wary of them. For example, this one is poorly graded because it's an internet poll rather than a traditional phone poll. Rasmussen, just because it tends to be very Republican biased, that's probably why it gets this grade. Ipsos is pretty good. YouGov is okay, but I have some qualms about it, but I understand why it got that rating. Let's see if we can find one that has an A rating in here that actually, nope. Not recently, at least, so not even going to bother. Yeah, CNN's poll group, Siena, I believe that's Siena poll. It's reasonably accurate, and that was in the mid-40s. Monmouth, mid-40s again. And that's an A-plus pollster, so essentially one of the best. Okay, so now we're going to move on and look at the race for, if you look at the adjusted leader, Ipsos had a tie, but it's also gone a little bit back towards the Democrats in recent days, but not a significant amount. And I'm standing by my statement that the Democrats really need to win nationally for Congress by about 7 points in order to win the House of Representatives. Right now, they're far below that, and there's about 15% undecided, which undecided voters tend to break Republican because I have a theory that a lot of the undecided voters are secretly Republicans. They just don't like to admit it. And this theory has been mentioned before by other people. I'm not sure how credible it is because I haven't done my research on it. I'm just mentioning it as possible, though I would say don't base your predictions based off of that. Just know that historically undecideds tend to break with the Republicans in midterm years because Republicans tend to vote in midterm years. Now, this is probably going to be an exception because there is Democrat enthusiasm, of course. It is a Democrat year anyway. It should be, but there is potentially a little more Democrat enthusiasm. But I'm going to trust this gap is reasonably accurate because I'm going to assume it's going to be maybe only 1 or 2 points more Republican than this gap. So I'm essentially going to say it's like it'll break down to be like 52-48 or something like that when all is said and done, or wow, I pushed it all the way over here, or (53-47), somewhere in that range. I think that'd be reasonable. Republicans will probably hold the House by like 1 or 2 seats, or Democrats will win it by 1 or 2 seats. But it's going to be extremely close, and that's the way I'm seeing it at this very moment. That is more than likely going to change. As a matter of fact, I expect it to change. So it could go, and the most likely change is that it's going to get more Democrat, and the Democrats are going to win the House, but it's gotten a lot harder, and I'm still not sure as to why it's gotten harder, because there are a lot of things that could have changed it. Recently, the Democrats got really close to actually wind up being behind. They could have been behind. Anyway, so we're going to start with Texas. And a lot of people have said that Beto O'Rourke has a shot at winning. I'm going to explain why he doesn't. Yes, he'll be within 10%, I think. But he's not going to win. And there's a reason. Texas is actually a very... Texas has a very large minority population, both African American and Hispanic, but the voting demographic is much wider in Texas. The other thing is Texas Hispanics tend to identify more as whites anyway, and there's a few reasons for that. The longer a population, specifically of Hispanics, Latino voters, is in the states. I forget where I found this information. If anybody can find it again, that'd be great. Post it up in the comments. But I was reading somewhere that the longer the Latino group is in the United States, the more they identify as white, which is interesting. And of course, I won't say they take on more, stereotypically white positions on issues, but it seems that maybe there is some of that. In addition, there is some, but again, the voting population in Texas, the voting demographic in Texas is wider than the overall demographic. The other thing is, has to do with the primary votes. Midterm turnout is typically about half of general election turnout. Maybe a little bit more than half, so like 60%. And the primaries are not much more than that. So, of course, we all know Ted Cruz won the Republican primary. There were 1.5 million Republican primary voters. And if we go to the Democrat primary, you saw Beto O'Rourke. He won the Democrat primary. By the way, Ted Cruz more than doubled Beto O'Rourke's primary vote total. But there were essentially 1 million Democrat voters in the primaries versus 1.5 million Republican voters. If anybody seriously thinks there are 500,000 voters for the Democrats to make up in the general, I want whatever they're smoking, because it is some good stuff. It really is. Now, that said, can the Democrats maybe make up the gap? Sure. There are maybe, I'd estimate that there's going to be a total of 5 million votes cast. So that'd be something like 2.75 to 2.25 million, and that'll mostly go to the Republican. There are a few independent candidates. There's a Libertarian, and the general election is currently posted as likely Republican. If we look at Ted Cruz, he has of course all the Republican endorsements, including his fellow Texas senator. Of course, Beto O'Rourke has a lot of support from Democrats. Yeah. But if we look at polls, every single one shows Cruz ahead. I'm going to ignore the Cruz pollster, internal pollster, and this Texas Lyceum poll because both were in 2017. One was especially early in 2017. When a Democrat internal poll shows your candidate losing by about 10%, shows their candidate losing by 10%, that's not good. There's good and there's not good, and that's not good. This Quinnipiac poll shows it within 3% with 8 undecided. That would be reasonably within the margin. That's within the margin of error. That's very good for Beto O'Rourke. And that's why I'm not going to say Texas Cruz is going to win this handily. I'm saying that it's very unlikely that O'Rourke can win. It's still possible, but I just don't really see it just yet. Now, of course, I'm ignoring this one because it's a Republican internal poll. I'd say this probably is similar to this Quinnipiac poll in terms of actual gap. However, this Quinnipiac poll from late May, essentially last week, shows Cruz ahead by 11 with 9% undecided. Cruz is already at 50% in this one, and yeah, so the only poll that showed a Democrat ahead of Cruz was this Texas Lyceum poll from early 2017, and it was Joaquin Castro with 31% undecided. Yeah, I totally believe that a Democrat would win that race if these were the base numbers and that's the number of undecideds. Yeah, no. Public policy polling would have showed Cruz ahead of Joaquin Castro, but that was in 2016, and the same thing from this Dixie Strategies poll, and another 2016 poll showed Ted Cruz ahead of Wendy Davis. So yeah, long story short on Texas, sorry Beto O'Rourke fans, it's not that likely. I'm not going to put it as safe, I'm only putting it as likely, which is a change. 2-3 years ago, I would have said this is safe red. Don't even joke about a Democrat winning in Texas, but it is getting a little more possible. So, Utah. Well, we had octogenarian Orrin Hatch, who had better weed jokes than a libertarian who supports marijuana legalization. You know, Orrin Hatch is the guy who said it was high time we legalized weed. Anyway, so he's announced his retirement after a 7th term, upholding his promise that if he were elected, it would have been his last term. Though he did announce a re-election campaign, but most wanted him to retire anyway. It's still not sure whether it's going to be Mitt Romney or Mike Kennedy, who are going to run for, who's going to be the nominee, but it's likely going to be Mitt Romney if polls are anything to go off of, or the one poll we have, at least according to Wikipedia. Yeah, we're not going to look at that one. And Mitt Romney has all the endorsements. And this is a bit of a hit on the Republicans because Orrin Hatch is the Senator pro tempore. He's actually technically in line for the presidency at the moment. But I doubt that's going to happen. So the Democrats have Jenny Wilson, and that is it. And we actually do have some polls. And there are 3 write-ins and a libertarian and a constitution and an independent. Utah is a very conservative state, if you couldn't tell. Of course, everybody says that it's solid Republican. That's to be expected. And I would grade this as safe Republican just looking at the polls. If we only look at 2018 polls, of which there are 2, Jenny Wilson isn't even at 20%, and Romney's over 60% both times. In 2017, he was over 70% and still over 60%. So, yeah, that's kind of game over for Jenny Wilson. So, Utah is definitely a Republican column. And this puts them at 49. When we get to Wyoming, that'll put them at 50, though there's one more state that I think is actually going to be truly competitive, maybe Wisconsin, but I doubt it. I really don't think Wisconsin's going to flip. But when we get there and look at polls, things might change. So yeah, Bernie Sanders is running again. And he is running as an independent, so that means the Democrats might nominate someone else. They might nominate someone other than Sanders, though the Democrats might sit this one out since Sanders does caucus with the Democrats. And most people are saying it's solid for Sanders, and I would agree with that. That said, I do reserve the right to change this if the Democrats don't nominate Sanders or sit this one out. I might have to change this to say, that it might lean Republican because of that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope y'all enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy. Bye.